Hello and welcome to Agri-History. In this episode, we will cover the topic of dry bean. Dry beans, also known as PHASEOLUS vulgaris, belong to the legume family. Within the province of Ontario, my home province, over 80% of the dry beans gets exported. In this episode, we'll cover the domestication of dry beans. We will also be covering the topic of flax. Flax is the common name for a species, Lilium ulicium. This species has many uses in industrial food and feed purposes. We will also cover the topic of this species in terms of domestication and origins. The wild ancestor of the domesticated dry bean is believed to have diversified into different strains in South and Central America. It is from these two populations that the dry beans were probably domesticated from. These two domestication events would have happened independently in those regions. These two populations will have followed a convergent evolution in terms of domestication. These strains would be called the Andean and Mesoamerican strains. There are, however, some recent works that defend a purely Mesoamerican origin for the dry bean. This is based entirely on the extensive diversity and population structure within the Mesoamerican gene pool, and the smaller, more narrow gene pool of the Andes populations. The paper by Quartz et al. On the origin of dry beans states that these phenomena are not only circumstantial but do not exclude the Andean independent domestication, as bottlenecks can happen due to outside factors such as colonization and conquest, not just secondary domestication. It will be hard to sort out this debate due to the fact that there has been integration between the wild strains of dry bean and its cultivated forms. Archaeological investigations have shown a light into how domesticated dry beans were moved throughout America. Using carbon-14 dating, various researchers have found collections of bean samples that are dated between 2300 BP and 1000 BP in the United States collection. In collections found in eastern Mexico, samples have been dated between 7000 BP and 4300 BP. Experiments by Dr. McNeish and Dr. Smith concluded that all samples were of cultivated origin, and as such, the cultivated forms of many different types of bean seem to radiate from that specific point. Yellow beans, buff beans, and pinto beans seem to originate from northwestern Mexico, while the black, brown, and red beans seem to have been bred in southeastern Mexico and Central America. This is further evidenced by the fact that the wild bean strains are smaller than the cultivated bean strains, and the largest of the wild bean strains are hybrids between the two strains. Most of the intermediaries between our current cultivated beans and the wild strains exist in various heritage collections, villages with traditional bean cultures, showcasing the transition from wild beans to our domesticated forms. In Peru, there have been several excavations, one of which is in Guatiro Cave. In the 1980s, Dr. Lynch excavated that cave and found remnants of beans associated with charcoal dated to around 7680 BP, plus or minus 280 years BP. Dr. Lynch also found bean pods that are dated between 2505 BP and 2405 BP, as well as beans dated between 2750 BP and 2640 BP, and several other beans dated at similar time periods. Given that the general consensus on the origin point of dry bean cultivation in Mexico is around 7000 BP, it is likely that the domestication process for Peru happened later than in Mexico, and current archaeological evidence seems to confirm this, with Peruvian beans likely being domesticated around 2500 BP. Flax is the earliest oil and fiber crop known. It was one of the many founder crops bred in the Near East, approximately 10,000 years ago. Until the 20th century, flax was the primary source of oil and fiber, and to this day remains a crop of high importance. There are two forms of flax in cultivation. The first type is broadly known as the oil strain. The second type is broadly known as the fiber strain. It is currently unknown which one came first from the breeding practices. But what is known is that this species was bred from a species of flax known as the pale flax. And this species, unlike most other progenitor crop ancestors, has a wide range of geographies that the species inhabits. Based on a complex genetic analysis, flax was only domesticated once from one population of mutated pale flax. By tracing the gene called the SAD2 gene, which is the gene responsible for its oil production, it was discovered that from their primordial origin point, they spread into Western and Eastern Europe, creating one unique branch of the cultivated flax species, and it's from that lineage that all our current flax cultivars are bred from, in both Europe and North America. This European population contains genes from populations from Africa, the Near East, and Southeastern Asia, while the African and Near East populations are more closely related to each other than they are to the Southeast Asian and the European branches, indicating their primordial origin. But the current genetic evidence leaves open for an extinct population that access the primordial origin for flax. Whether or not this is the case is uncertain. Based on current evidence, it has been discovered that the first flax breeds were probably oil-bearing due to higher genetic diversity and studies involving the gene flow between the two groups, using ancient flax as a base. This concludes our video on beans and flax. Stay tuned for our episode on lentils. See you then.